Last week, we named the spectrum, all 21 categories of disability recognized under India's Right of Person with Disabilities Act 2016. In plain language, the language of a classroom, the language of a child you've already met. I hope that episode made you see something differently. I hope it made you think of a student or a teacher or a colleague whose experience suddenly made more sense. This week, I want to do something harder. I want to hold up a mirror, not to blame, not to accuse, but because I genuinely believe that most school leaders in India are good people who want to do right by every child in their school. And I also believe that most schools in India, including some of the best ones, are unintentionally exclusionary in ways they have never stopped to examine. Not out of malice, out of unawareness. And unawareness is exactly what this series exists to address. This is the Education Verdict, powered by India Inclusion Foundation. And today I want to walk you through 4 categories of barriers that exist in almost every Indian school. Physical barrier, attitude barrier, curriculum barriers, and assessment barriers. By the end of this episode, I want you to have a simple question running in your head. Which of these barriers exist in my school? And what am I going to do about it? Before we get into it, a quick reminder. If you have not yet downloaded the School Leader's Complete Guide to the Disability Spectrum, the link is in the description below. It covers all 21 disability categories in plain language, completely free. Print it, share it with your team. Now, let us look in the mirror. What the law actually requires. Let me start with something that surprises most school leaders when they hear it. The Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016 is not just a welfare document. It is a rights document. And it places specific enforceable obligations on educational institutions, not suggestions, obligations. Here is what the law requires of schools in plain language. Every child with a benchmark disability between the ages of 6 and 18 has the right to free education in a neighborhood school of their choice. Not a special school. A regular school, your school. The law requires schools to admit students with disabilities without discrimination. To make buildings, campuses, and facilities physically accessible. To provide individualized support. To detect specific learning disabilities early and respond with appropriate teaching methods. To monitor the participation and progress of every student with a disability. And to ensure that the teaching and learning environment is adapted to meet the needs of different kinds of learners. Now, I want to ask you an honest question. How many of those requirements does your school currently meet? If your honest answer is not all of them, you are in a good company. The gap between what the law requires and what most Indian schools actually do is significant. And it exists not because school leaders are indifferent, but because nobody ever sat down with them and said, here is what the law requires, here is where you currently are, and here is what you need to do. That is what today is all about. Let's talk about barrier number 1, physical barriers. When the building itself sends a message about who belongs here. Walk around your school tomorrow morning, not as the principal, as a child in a wheelchair, or a child on crutches, or a child with low vision trying to read the signs on the wall. Can you get from the school gate to your classrooms without encountering a single step? Can you access the bathroom? Can you sit in the laboratory or the library? Can you participate in assembly? Can you reach your locker? For millions of students with locomotor disabilities, low vision, or physical impairments, the answer to most of these questions in most Indian schools is no. What the law says? The RPWD Act 2016 mandates that educational institutions make buildings, campuses, and all facilities accessible. This includes ramps, handrails, accessible bathrooms, appropriate signage, and pathways that do not exclude anyone. This is not optional. It is a legal requirement. What the reality is? Most Indian schools, including many high-fee private schools, have not conducted a single physical access audit. The school may have a ramp at the main entrance and consider the matter resolved. But inclusion is not a ramp at the front door. It is access to every space in the school every day for every student. Barrier number 2, attitude barriers. The most invisible barrier and the most damaging one. A student with cerebral palsy joins a new school. On the first day, a teacher asks the parent, rather than the student, what subjects they can manage. A student with hearing impairment raises their hand in class. The teacher says, do not worry, I will explain it to you separately after class. A student with Down syndrome is told by a well-meaning counselor that they might be happier in a school better suited to their needs. None of these teachers intended harm. Every single one of them caused it. Because attitude barrier is not built from cruelty. It is built from assumptions. Assumptions about what a person with a disability can do, what they want, what they deserve, and where they belong. What the law says. The RPWD Act 2016 requires schools to sensitize all stakeholders, including teachers, students, and parents, to create a conducive environment for students with disabilities. And what the reality is, sensitization in most Indian schools means a single assembly talk on Disability Day in December. What it actually requires is ongoing structured training for every teacher, a culture that is built from top, and a school leader who models the right language and the right assumptions every single day. Barrier number 3, curriculum barriers. When the content was never designed with every learner in mind. The curriculum in most Indian schools assumes one kind of learner. A learner who reads fluently, writes quickly, processes auditory instructions, sits still for extended periods, works independently, and performs under timed conditions. For a student with dyslexia, that curriculum is a daily obstacle course. For a student on the autism spectrum, a classroom that constantly changes its routine is a source of genuine distress. For a student with intellectual disability, abstract concepts taught at grade level pace are simply inaccessible. This is not the student's failure. It is a curriculum design failure. When a curriculum is built for one kind of mind and presented in one kind of way, every other kind of mind is excluded by design, not by intent. Let's see what the law says. The RPWD Act 2016 defines inclusive education as a system where students with and without disabilities learn together, and where teaching and learning is adapted to meet the needs of different kinds of learners. And let's look what the reality is. Most Indian schools use one textbook, one pace, one assessment format, and one definition of achievement. Universal design for learning, the principle of building flexibility into curriculum from the beginning rather than adding accommodations as an afterthought, is almost entirely unknown Indian school leadership conversations. Barrier number 4, assessment barriers. When how we measure achievement excludes the very students who need to be measured fairly. Consider what a standard Indian school examination asks of a student. 3 hours, pin drop silence, pen and paper, timed, no movement, no breaks. Questions that require reading quickly, writing extensively, and performing under pressure. For a student with dyslexia, that format actively disadvantages them regardless of how much they know. For a student with ADHD, 3 hours of enforced stillness is not an assessment of their knowledge. It is an assessment of their ability to manage their neurological condition under extreme conditions. And when a student with learning disability scores poorly, we call it their result rather than our design failure. Let's look at what the law says. The RPWD Act 2016 gives students with specific learning disabilities the right to accommodations in examination. This includes extra time, a scribe, the ability to use a computer, and alternative question formats. CBSE and many state boards have accommodation provisions. The majority of schools either do not know this or do not implement it. Let's look what the reality is. Assessment accommodation is not giving a student an unfair advantage. It is removing an unfair disadvantage. A student with dyslexia who is given extra time is not being given more than other students. They are being given the same access to demonstrating what they know that other students take for granted. That is what fairness actually means. I want to give you 4 questions, one for each barrier. I would ask you to write these down. For physical barriers, the question is, can a student with a locomotor disability access every single space in my school independently, without help, without embarrassment? And not just the main entrance, every space. Question for attitude barriers. And please write it down. When did my school last run a structured, proper training session on disability awareness for every member of the teaching staff? Not an assembly, not a poster, a training session. And the question for the curriculum barrier is, does my school have a written policy on curriculum adaptation for students with disabilities? And if yes, when was it last actually used? Question for assessment barrier is, do the students in my school who are entitled to examination accommodations under the RPWD Act 2016 know that they are entitled to them? Does my school actively identify and support those students? 4 questions, honest answers only. If you are sitting with uncomfortable answers right now, that discomfort is useful. It is the beginning of something. Because you cannot fix what you have not yet named. And you have just named it. Now I want to tell you something important. I have not shared any of this to make you feel like inclusion is impossible. I've shared it because I have seen what happens when a school leader decides to actually begin. I know schools in India that started their inclusion journey by simply walking around the building with a checklist and a student in a wheelchair and fixing what they found. I know teachers who changed the way they ran their class after a single conversation about specific learning disabilities. I know principals who introduced one simple accommodation in one examination and discovered that it changed a student's entire relationship with school. Friends, inclusion does not begin with a complete overhaul. It begins with one honest audit, one decision, one change. Next week in episode 3, I'm going to give you exactly that. A clear, practical, no excuse guide to what you can start doing tomorrow. Not the gold standard, the starting point. The things that cost almost nothing and change everything. But this week, I just want to leave you with the audit. 4 questions, honest answers written down. Because the school that asks these questions honestly is already ahead of the schools that never ask them at all. This is the Education Verdict, the Disability Inclusion series powered by India Inclusion Foundation. I will see you next Friday, and next Friday we get practical. Good night.